futurism, which we thought was a really neat aesthetic where it combines all the fancy gadgets and gizmos of your traditional, Star Treks and Star Wars with the big brass pipes and levers and gears of what we traditionally think of as steampunk. We also wanted to take inspiration from other old sort of turn of the century Industrial Revolution, Victorian era England things like Tesla coils and the design style of the Bioshock Infinite game and the Bioshock series as a whole, which very well captured that kind of interesting blend between traditional steampunk and more futuristic elements. And that kind of laid the groundwork for the aesthetic inspiration as we went forward into the game and further refined our ideas for different characters and assets. The original gameplay concept was heavily inspired by classic arena shooters like the Unreal Tournament series, Quake, Half-Life, Team Fortress, even Counter-Strike to a certain degree. The initial idea, as I said before, was to progress from level to level, getting stronger each time you win, to face stronger challenges, diverging and using different upgrades and various boosts to make yourself stronger in order to beat the game eventually. At one point, we considered having enemy AI similar to how the Unreal Tournament games would have opposing teams that you would fight against, but that was sort of scrapped in favor of having quote unquote mob AI where you're fighting enemies, not other players in the form of enemies. The plot development, which was discussed very thoroughly in the early stages of the game's development, we decided to move away from the initial battle tower idea of fighting your way up to some imagined final floor, the last level where you would fight the final boss or the big honcho, any of those stereotypes you often see in video games, and instead fighting downwards through the innards and guts of a planet-scale drill that is in the process of burrowing to the core of the planet that the game takes place on, which is our protagonist's home world. The villain we imagined was not a single entity, but rather the far future human empire that has long since expanded outwards from Earth and is on a resource guzzling expansion throughout the galaxy. They power their futuristic steampunk devices using a valuable material that can only be extracted from the cores of certain planets. And so they use these massive drills to essentially mine the planets and destroy them in the process to fuel their various futuristic machines. In this particular instance, we imagined that the humans had struck a sort of deal with the denizens of the planet that they would be allowed to use their drill in exchange for peaceful relations, while subtly concealing the fact that it would destroy the planet in the process. The protagonist realizes that this would in fact result in the destruction of their homeworld, and so fights through the drill, which has left from the human establishment city of Preshire, which the name inspired which became the game's namesake later, is the mix of that sort of Victorian era English naming conventions along with pressure, which since steampunk uses steam, we kind of use steam and pressure interchangeably when it comes to that aspect of the game. And the simple goal of the game, of course, is to just fight your way to the bottom of the drill so your planet doesn't explode. We thought that it didn't need to be very complicated. Arena fighter games seldom are. And we thought we had an interesting enough hook to keep a player engaged if we were to walk them through the story. The game development, meanwhile, was primarily focused, especially in the early stages, on trying to replicate the inspirations. So trying to get that old school arena shooter Quake feel down. And so in order to keep it simple, we wanted to originally had a bunch of different ideas for various enemy types, but we kind of decided that we should limit it to 3 or 4 and not much more than that, so we didn't become overwhelmed. We also did plan for a light upgrade system, as was mentioned earlier. The first semester of development, we kind of realized that we would have to scale back. Our initial plan was to have 3 levels, but we realized that we would really only be able to make one, and so we wanted to focus on making that one level as good as we could make it. Um, the later development period was very much focused on again just that, which was refining that one level that we did have as much as we could possibly do. Um, we essentially wanted to make a good proof of concept demo to showcase our basic idea for the game, with the idea that it could then be further developed into the sort of grandiose world-saving conquest adventure that we had originally envisioned. And now we'll get on to what we all worked on in this project now that you sort of know what we actually were trying to make. So, first of all, is Jared Aho. Jared, are you there?
Sorry, forgot to unmute. I apologize. There's no images on the right. You can ignore that. So I'm the lead artist and the character designer. I made the player character concept, the modeling, the texturing, the animating, all of that for the main character. I did some UI element art and the game's logo and some artistic design directing. So when we were creating the player character, we started with a sort of a group sort of brainstorming session where we would discuss like the sort of main mechanics of the game. That's where all the sort of plot relevant stuff came up. And once we had an idea of that, once we had an idea of the main mechanics of the game, um, and how the player would interact with those elements, I incorporated that into my sort of philosophy behind what the designs I would create for this game would sort of look like. So, for example, the weapon that the main character uses, all of them are, they all utilize the same fuel reserve for being steam. So we imagined a sort of multi-purpose steam tank on the back of the character and some other similar concepts like that. So those sort of concepts came together to sort of help me build what type of characters I wanted to make for this game. So once we were done brainstorming that, and once I came up with some different design concepts, we settled on one of them, and then the character was brought into 3D. So, for some references and inspiration here, um, using the sort of before I came up with any concepts for any of the characters, I tried to get an idea of what types of characters I wanted to make using the aesthetic inspirations we had all agreed on. Um, so I gathered many reference images. There's many more than these, but I decided to show what's most relevant here. Um, so I came up with some ideas of like coal miners, welders, engineers, some formal industrial outfits, and like robots like Machinarium, and some character designs inspired by Atlantis, that movie. You know that one. So after that, I created 5 different concepts for main character, and they're all labeled A to E, and then we all voted on one, and E won, obviously. And then after that, I drew some sort of basic sketches to get a feel of the character to see like how they would move, how would they flow. And then once I decided on that, I designed multiple different palettes, and then me and the art team, being Gabe and Kai and we all decided on one of those palettes. And after some touch-ups, it was pretty solid. So continuing off from the last semester, uh, the, I left off only with 2D concepts and a rough sculpt of a bald head, but then using both the front and side view of the character, I made two 2D drawings there. I was able to sculpt the main body for the character, later adding hair, clothing, and accessories, and then it was soon complete. So then it was on to making a low poly cage for the model. That was probably the hardest part, and but with some help with my fellow teammates and the professor, I was able to get that done pretty soon. And then I did some rigging and weight painting, then some texture painting, and then I was fully able to grasp what I was working with. I did some posing tests, and I did the baking later. But then excuse me, I got some weapons modeled by Noah, and I put them in the characters' hands and tried out what they would look like holding them. So once the character model was complete, I could use the model in terms of scale for the arms view model, which is what appears in the game with all the animations and everything. And while the full model never shows up in the game itself, uh, we had later planned to use it for sort of later cutscenes or specific actions. So now the weapon itself is not actually part of the animations. The weapon is just put there for like the reference, and then they're later applied in game via Unity. And I also finished the bake.
Next up is Gabe Black.
Mentioned previously, I did the level design and asset creation for said levels. This included sketching and refining layouts for the levels, creating gray boxed or bricked, however you want to refer to it, levels in Unity for the testing. And then once I got that down, I went on to modeling and texturing said assets. And I also did some minor help with the other assets that needed it. So in the first semester, once we came up with the idea of like a futuristic sci-fi steampunk era, I got to work on making very rough sketches of what was needed. Um, I have I made initially 3 levels, 2 of which were cut, which those 2 were the bottom one on the right image and the first image on the um, left. Um, I also had some basic level assets that I would have needed for the various levels, but other than that, I was just making a list of what I needed to make for these levels. After getting the level ideas down, I went into Unity and used the Pro Builder tool to make blocked out levels for the rest of the team to, like specifically the programming team, to test on. So right here is the blocked out level, the first level, which is the one that we kept with. And if this is the second level, I wanted to do like a 2-story idea just to get a bit more verticality in our game. But again, had to be cut too ambitious to do more than one level, and the third level here. So after getting the sketches down and a rough idea of what I wanted, I hopped into Blender and started doing some modeling. Started off with some crates and barrels and moved on to ramps and other needed objects in the level, um, as well as some miscellaneous objects that would just fill up the empty space to make everything look nice. Once my entire asset library was down, I hopped into modeling, which took a majority of the second semester. Uh, it, I realized it took quite a while to texture paint objects, especially if you're not that well versed in it. But I did eventually get what I wanted down, and after that, it was just essentially taking all my level assets and putting them into a final level for a final layout.
And up next is our enemy designer, Kai Gilmet.
Hello, as you know, I'm Kaigamed. I created the enemy here. I created the whole concept for the enemy. I refined his concept, translating that into a 3D model and then textured said 3D model. In our very first brainstorming session, we all were discussing many ideas and we were discussing robotic enemies. And one that stood out to all of us was the idea of a sort of symbiotic robot that was similar to that of the headcrab zombies from Half-Life, where one bot, which we dubbed the Hat Bot, would attach to the head of a larger bot, which we called the Guard Bot. They worked as one unit until one of the bots were taken out. If the Hat Bot was taken down, the Guard Bot would beeline for the player and self-destruct. While if the Guard Bot was taken out, the hat would pop off and reveal itself to be one of two different versions, being a flying version and a crawling version. During that meeting, we discussed a few things that inspired our idea for the bot. Some of our ideas were the movie robots, as mentioned, Claptrap from the Borderland games, and Doris from Meet the Robinsons. And from there, I started grabbing images that would help me formulate the ideas into designing the robots. And from that, I created some of these sketches, which were not used for the final design. Finalizing it, we ended up choosing a bot that was based on a Victorian era police officer or a bobby, with the hat following the same idea, being based on the hats from the time. I wasn't done talking. We ended up choosing the design because it fit very well with the style of the game, and it looked the most fitting for the combative role it was supposed to take. From those sketches, I created the models as seen here of the Bobby. And then I created the Hatbot, which was mainly based on Doris from Meet the Robinsons, which I think is especially showing in its crawling form. And it was probably one of the easier of the two bots to model.
Thank you, Kai. So hi again. I'm Noah Belmer. I was the team lead, and I also did a whole bunch of various miscellaneous jobs depending on what we needed at any given time in the project. I've done everything from programming the character, the weapons, and most of the menus for the game, to importing and integrating a lot of the assets that our amazing art team made to make sure that they're ready for use inside the game engine. I also modeled the player weapons, which we'll get to in a moment. I also took Kai's amazing Guardbot and Hatbot models and animated them. And I worked to manage deadlines and organizational things for the rest of the team to try and keep everything as orderly as I could manage. I also forgot to put a little image here. So Jared, you are not alone. So the first thing was coding the character. And here you can see a little example of a slightly earlier version of the game with most of the things complete. A really important thing to me was replicating that Quake feel of the old games. I actually went and downloaded Unreal Tournament 2004, Counter-Strike Source, and I played a lot of Half-Life 1 to really get accustomed to how it feels to play those games so that I could really try and replicate that inside of Unity. I really wanted to focus on quick maneuverability and sort of trigger quick actions on the horizontal axis, so not necessarily a lot of vertical movement, but a lot of strafing back and forth, moving backwards, things like that. And as stated, I spent a lot of time really tinkering with all kinds of variables and whatnot to really get that feeling down because it was such an important part of how I envisioned the game playing. I also coded the weapons that the player uses. I used scriptable objects, which is a really neat Unity feature that basically allows you to create super lightweight prefabricated presets that can be customized with all kinds of different options like damage, range, all sorts of different things that you would need for a weapon, and then they can essentially be slotted into a weapon slot, and they can be used interchangeably really easily. The character keeps a list of these weapons that they have, and then whenever you tell it to switch to one of your 3 different weapon slots, it will just change. It'll point its current weapon to whichever one you tell it to, and it doesn't have to do any heavy lifting in terms of making sure that that weapon works, because it's all set up using the same inputs and outputs in terms of programming. I made 3 different weapon types: hit scan, projectile, and hitbox. That means hit scan is like shooting a laser beam, straight to the point. There's no in between. It's just you draw a straight line straight there, and whatever you hit, you hit. Projectile actually launches a physical object that when it collides with something, it will do whatever it's supposed to do. And then hitbox just makes a big box and anything inside of it gets hit, as the name implies. The projectile type is currently unused because I very quickly figured out that trying to replicate the speed at which a bullet shoots is not very great for Unity's engine, because the object will actually move too quickly for the physics registration to detect that something has collided with another object. So bullets would just whiz through enemies without dealing any damage, which obviously wasn't ideal. So as of yet, the projectile weapon type is not used. If I ever were to implement something like a grenade or a rocket launcher or something like that that uses a slower moving projectile, then I would probably have cause to reuse it. But currently, the SMG hit scan, which is our sort of bullet weapon, works by firing essentially dummy projectiles to the hit positions of the raycasts that it creates, to simulate using projectiles, even though all of the actual calculations for damage and hits and whatnot are done via hit scan raycasts. And melee weapons work much the same, except they just have a very short range and no no recoil. The rest of the code is quite a few things here and there. As I said before, a lot of miscellaneous stuff, menus, some buttons. I worked on some scene loading between some of the different menus. And I also used a little bit of Crimson starter code to help build a shell for a game manager that manages flow of gameplay when you're actually in the level. And then Nathan sort of took that and ran a million miles with it. And I also did coding for things like making sure that the player can't jump and run around when the game is paused, and other little gameplay touches here and there like that, primarily concerned with the player and how they interact with the rest of the world. And here we just have a quick example. This is code from the shooting mechanic for the raycast weapons. So it basically just creates a spread variable based on the weapon's projectile spread, and then applies that to the final position that it's shooting out, so that a straight line becomes just a little bit angled to a varying amount, and make sure that the animations know that they should be playing the shooting animation. And I also modeled all 3 weapons for the character. The first and, in my opinion, most impressive and most fun to make was the steam thrower. I really wanted this thing, because it was such a sort of unique weapon idea, I wanted it to really be something that was not just unique in terms of weapons in games, but also unique in the context of the world. So I sort of designed it with the idea that it was a backyard creation, something that our protagonists had kind of slapped together in their garage or something, a ramshackle weapon made of a bunch of disparate scavenged parts that they could use to take advantage of the fact that everything in their world is powered by steam, and so being able to siphon and then use it as a weapon would be very advantageous and might give them just the fighting edge that they need to win the day and succeed at their underdog story. I had a lot of inspirations for this. As you can see, this isn't even all of them. These are just sort of the ones that had the most impact. Things like various designs for steampunk miniguns and flamethrowers, as well as 2 of the flamethrowers from the Pyro class from the game Team Fortress 2, a sci-fi gun that I found, a pressure gauge, and most notably the Tikar rifle from the Metro Exodus game, which is basically exactly what this is. It is a pressure-powered firearm that shoots little metal pellets. You have to pump it, much like a bicycle pump, to increase the pressure and make it shoot. So it's hard to see in this particular picture, but it has a little pressure readout, which I did incorporate into the model because I thought that kind of aesthetic of all sorts of little pipes and wires going everywhere really fit not only the steampunk aesthetic, but the ramshackle aesthetic of the weapon itself. Next came the wrench, which was one of the most simple weapons. It was actually the first one that I modeled because I wanted to kind of ease my way into it. I had not done a lot of modeling before this project, so I didn't want to throw myself headfirst into the most complicated weapon. And this one was fairly simple. Originally, I had intended for it to be a kind of all-purpose multi-tool with all kinds of gadgets and gizmos sticking out, like a saw, a little miniature saw, and lockpick, all sorts of things like that. But then I realized that that didn't really fit what it was used for, which is, of course, being a wrench. It's equally as good at fixing problems as it is bashing them to pieces. This is also the weapon that I textured. I did not make textures for the other two weapons. That was actually Gabe. He graciously swept in and helped me with those because texturing is definitely not my strong suit. But this one I did do the textures for. I kind of wanted to give it a sort of rusted, heavily used look, which was the general aesthetic we were going for with a lot of the aspects of the game. And I created a low poly cage and then baked the textures and bump maps and all that to get a lower poly version actually into the game while preserving most of the important detail from the higher quality version. And last but not least is the SMG, the steam machine gun, as I like to call it. It was just a very simple idea. It's a gun that fires pellet bullets by blasting them with a lot of pressure in a very small area. The idea is that it vents the excess pressure out of a little pipe in the back and then pushes that out through these little vented grates at the back of the weapon. It was very heavily inspired by the MAC-10 submachine gun, which anybody who's played a video game before probably recognizes off the back of their hand. This one, there's not much to say about it other than I thought it was a neat design and fit the world pretty well, since it seems like something that's not a pain to lug around, and the idea of a gun shooting just with pure pressure without any explosions or anything was interesting to me. I also worked on animations for Kai's amazing robot models. Although, unfortunately, due to some issues with actually importing these animations into Unity and getting them to work, none of these are used in game because of time constraints and a few other factors. They just didn't make it into the final cut, but I still had a lot of fun doing them. They were primarily inspired by the medic bot from the Team Fortress 2 man versus machine mode because they share a very similar body structure, and they have that kind of very similar, I guess, nervous combative energy to them that I really liked. And the hat bots themselves were fairly simple. For the crawler bot, which isn't pictured here because I had a whole other slew of problems with the animations for that one, was heavily modeled after the aforementioned, creepy crawlies, the head crabs from Half-Life, and spiders and whatnot. And then, of course, putting it all together, since I did a lot of things in terms of asset integration, so taking Jared's animations, Jared's models, Kai's models, all the different textures and stuff, and making sure that they are imported into Unity properly and function correctly. I worked with Jared's first-person view model, which is just the arms and weapons, to make sure that the weapons that I had modeled synced up properly with the animations that he had created, since, as he said, his animations didn't have the weapons in them. They were empty-handed, so technically you could swap in any other weapon with a similar shape, and it would work just as well with those animations, which was something, while we didn't have any extra weapons, is something important that we thought was important to keep in mind in case we ever wanted to continue on with this concept. And while it's not particularly complex, it was definitely a fun process getting to kind of see everything come together, and I really got to see the game really take place, shape up before my eyes and turn into the thing that we had all wanted to make. And I'm very glad that I got to see that because it was a really incredible experience. And last but not least is Nathan, our stalwart head programmer.
Nathan and I worked on a multitude of different things, but I'm going to be talking about the UI programming, a little bit of the AI programming, and level object programming. Just a quick overview of the HUD, the main core elements being the health and pressure bar, with the health being represented by Edison bulbs and the pressure being a pressure gauge, obviously. We got a timer up at the top, objectives on the top left, and weapon portrait on the bottom right. Starting out with the health bulbs, they're made off of the Edison bulb, and each bulb represents a portion of the player's health. When the health portion is depleted, it will break, as we can see in the GIF, and the bulb will dim when when the player takes a portion of the health that is a portion of the bulb. Here is the pressure gauge along with the weapon portrait. The pressure gauge pretty much dictates how long you can be in combat for. It depletes whenever you're using your steam thrower or you're using your SMG, and it will passively regenerate over time, as we can see on the top right. But this regen is pretty slow, so you can go and siphon pressure from pipes around the map. And the weapon portrait's not all that interesting. It just switches the icon depending on what item you're currently using. Next we have the timer. This is based off of a Nixie tube, which is a really interesting idea or concept that I thought fit the general aesthetic of the game. And this is based off of sprites instead of a text component, because I felt like it would be easier to modify the positioning of all of the elements so you can have a vertical, horizontal, so on and so forth. Next there was map assets. Only 2 of them made the final cut. We got a bursted pipe in the center. We can see that it's spewing a bunch of steam that can be siphoned up by the player to rapidly regenerate their pressure tank. And then we have a moving level object on the right being a piston. This just allows the player to reach the second elevation and give them that extra bit of verticality.
And that is it for each of our individual segments. So I also prepared a little bit of a very short post-mortem on the development of the game. Just sort of looking back at everything we did, everything we accomplished, everything we wish we had accomplished, and most importantly, in my opinion, what we learned from the experience. I got to add back another thing. So first of all, what we learned, the development of Under Pressure was like a really amazing and invaluable experience that our entire team had an absolute blast working on. From pitching our first proto ideas to one another in the fall of 2021 to putting on the finishing touches during this past week, we got to see this project evolve from really an ambitious but unrealized idea to the demo that we have today, which we're all incredibly proud of and we believe captures the essence of what the most important parts of our game were at the very start. During the course of this development, we faced a whole slew of setbacks and had to make some tough choices here and there to cut some features or scale down in what we wanted to accomplish. But ultimately, what we learned was that this process is a very difficult one, but very rewarding at the same time. While our finished product may be missing polish in some areas and original features in others, I can't help but feel an immense sense of pride in my fellow classmates and all the hard work that they put in over the past year to make this project happen. All the hours spent thinking of ideas, implementing them, making them work. It truly is incredible, and none of it would have been possible if any of us had not been here. And so I can say for absolute certain that we've all come away from this with a much greater appreciation for the development process and a whole toolbox of industry relevant skills that none of us walked into this project with. And of course, it's important to look at what went wrong in any project, right? So you can learn and hopefully do better next time. Ultimately, I think we suffered from ambition. Our hubris got a little bit of the best of us, and we didn't really consider a realistic timeline or what we could actually accomplish in the time we had when we were first coming up with all the different features for the game and what we wanted to get out of it. I think ambition can definitely be good, but you have to temper it with practicality, or else you're going to end up with a whole lot of projects that are 30% finished. and nothing that actually sees completion. So I definitely think that that was a lesson we all learned. As I said before, there's no enemy animations in this game. That was on me. I had a whole bunch of problems getting them out of Blender and into Unity properly. And I think that ultimately came down to how I was actually animating them inside of Blender. But I've definitely learned that, and that animation is not necessarily my strong suit, but that it's very fun. And I definitely like to learn a little bit more about it so that I can improve and not have the same problems next time. Obviously, we have one level instead of three that we originally planned for. This is a pretty obvious one looking back. There was no way we were going to have time for three whole levels, but it was definitely an important lesson to learn, and I think we still did pretty good with the level that we had. And then there were several mechanics that we had originally planned to put in the game that did not make the final cut for a couple of different reasons. Originally, we had Mercury as the currency in the game, which there was a whole explanation for that within the story that we can share later, but I didn't think it was particularly relevant seeing as it's not in the final cut. And that would be used to upgrade your character. The upgrade mechanic also, of course, having been cut for time. Saving and loading of the player statistics. Nathan did work on a really amazing saving and loading system, which I was very sorry to see not get implemented. But I really think he did an incredible job on making that happen. And so I count that less of a slight on. I don't count that as a slight. It's just an unfortunate reality, but I still think he did a really good job on that. And then we had originally planned for the steam thrower to knock enemies back when you hit them with it as sort of an AoE crowd control weapon option, but it just does damage in a big box. But I think it's also equally important to look at what went right and what we did accomplish. The feel of the game is basically exactly as we wanted it. It plays, I have been playing this game a lot to test it, and it plays exactly like the Unreal Tournament, Half-Life Deathmatch, old school arena shooter that we had wanted it to be. And that really does feel great to see it manifest that way. It's fast, snappy, action filled. It's very reminiscent of those games that we made our primary inspiration. I really think our art team hit it off with the aesthetic, transferring our ideas for what the world would be into the game assets. Things like the large industrial warehouses and all the equipment being kind of worn out and rusty. It really fits with that future space age steampunk industrial brutalism aesthetic that we had conglomerated over the many days of picking out different aesthetic inspirations. And so I think our art team really did an amazing job with transferring that into the game assets. Nathan did an amazing job on the enemy AI, considering how limited in scope it actually is, but I think that it works incredibly well. It has so many interesting little quirks and features that I wouldn't have necessarily even thought of, but he did, and they work really well to make the enemy feel just a little bit more weird and disjointed, but in a fun way. And ultimately, I think we worked really well as a team together. We communicated really well. We helped each other stay on top of things as best we could. We worked together in a really great way. And so I think that was definitely one of the things that went the best with this project, is that we all grew in our capacity to work as a team. And obviously we learned from our shortcomings. Everything in that what went wrong page we have recognized, and hopefully, we'll work towards not letting it happen again in whatever our future projects are, because we've seen how it can happen here. I think that's a really valuable experience, and definitely something to qualify under the what went right category. And overall, it was just a really fun experience. We all had a great time. I mean, making the game, joking over all the different little references we were going to put in it at the start, and how we were going to, combine everything, and seeing the game really take shape in this past month. I mean, it's incredible how when you start putting all of the different pieces together, it really becomes a game from just a bunch of disparate pieces. And I think everybody did an amazing job with their respective parts, and has improved incredibly in all of the different things that they did. Overall, I just want to thank everybody, my fellow classmates, Professor Frazier, everybody else who's helped us along the way to make this happen. It was really incredible, and I'm super proud of all the work we did and what we have to show for it. And without further ado, it's time for Under Pressure, or rather questions and answers, because we will demo the game after questions are asked.
Why don't you go ahead and demo the game and then we'll do questions.
Okay, perfect. Then in that case, without further ado, under pressure, let me load it up. The build running right here. Under pressure. Share screen. There we go. Once again, let me know if anything does not work, stream or anything like that, and I'll do my best to fix it. So here we have the main menu of the game. We do have an options menu. It is relatively simplistic because there's only two options. The most important one here is sensitivity. The game does not have audio. That was one thing that I forgot to mention in our what went wrong. There is, I believe, Nathan imported some audio, I believe, for the SMG, but there is not as much audio as we would have liked, which was another time issue that manifested in the final product. But this is actually the one example of Nathan's save system working. You can save your sensitivity. So if I were to set it to say 180 and save it, it saves it to an external file. And then when you load the game up again, you will still have a wildly high sensitivity. But that's a little too much for me. I'm going to drop it to like 50. And so now we'll get to the important part of the game, which is actually playing it. So as you can see, we have the grayed out shot menu because that fortunately didn't make it into the final cut, but we have a wonderful portrait of our main character here. And now I will get into the deploying part of the game. So see, we load into our level here, and you might see some crawling hat bots making their way around the level, jumping at me and attempting to wreak their havoc. Shoot that guy. So right now you see I'm using the steam machine gun, and in the bottom right corner you'll see that the pressure gauge is going down as I'm shooting, and then once it bottoms out, you might be able to notice if you're very eagle-eyed that the rate of fire has dropped quite a bit now that I'm out of the pressure. But if I were to let it charge up again, it would go quite a bit faster. I also have a steam thrower, which is the sort of AoE weapon. It does not do a lot of damage because, of course, these enemies are made of metal and are a little bit less susceptible to highly pressurized steam as opposed to a biological organism. But nonetheless, it is a powerful tool, especially because you can walk over to a steam pipe here and siphon some steam, and you'll see that the pressure gauge fills up very quickly and the particles disappear. We also have the wrench weapon, which is, it's a wrench. It's very simple. You swing it and you hit stuff. It does not get much more simple than that. And I think that's last guy up here. You also see in the top left, our objectives are increasing every time an enemy is killed. Seems like we have to kill 2 more hat copters. They're flying around as they do. And once they die, we just have to reach the exit, which is this glowing green particle field down here. And then we'll load back into the main menu. That is the game. It is affectionately called a proof of concept, and I think it's a pretty good one. We're all very proud of it.
It's definitely come a long way from when you showed me just on Friday. So good job on that. Is there any questions for the team?
Yes, we will now field any questions.
Oh, I just have to say, good job. Like even getting it this far and being able to work together and to bounce ideas, and then to realize that you went too far and you gotta make the cuts, and then you actually did it. It yeah, bravo to especially the presentation. Everything was very, but yeah. I'll plan on on that, or like
Your audio cut out a little bit at the end there, but thank you very much. I'm glad it was definitely a lot of fun, and seeing it all sort of come together despite the shortcomings. Yeah, thank you. You can either just say your questions out loud or type them in chat, whichever works better.
Can you guys hear me at all?
We can indeed.
Okay,
Yep.
terrific. Yeah, I want to echo what Spicer said. Yeah, great job overall. I think the thing that really stuck out to me that I appreciate that you all did, every single one of you, is you made decisions that were based off of not something that you just wanted to do, but that there were story conceits and functionality behind your decisions. So, I love that even in choosing like the Uzi gun, right? It had a utilitarian feel. So even though it doesn't necessarily automatically match what you think of in a sort of steampunk turn of the century style game, the fact that you're like, oh, we'll add this steam element to it and the functionality to how it shoots, I think it's terrific. I think there's a lot of people that are very far in their careers that have lost that ability to look at the source. And this is essentially a thesis for you guys, and you all kept in line with your thesis. You didn't lose sight of that, and that's so important. And that really plays throughout everything in the game, from the title menu to the designs of the bots, to the programming, to the UI. It all really translated. You didn't lose sight of that. So terrific job. I can tell you can really tell that you guys work together on this. I love that you guys picked up areas and slack for each other where needed. And then finally, I would say I think it's great that you owned your shortcomings up front. There's a lot of integrity that comes with showing or telling your audience like, hey, it doesn't have this, this didn't work out, and just owning that rather than trying to cover that up. So yeah, terrific job overall. Everybody, great work. It was really a pleasure to see all your guys' work come together.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone else at all?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's splendid. I had quite some trouble with the microphone and the volume earlier. So I don't have a question, but I have another comment, and that is that I really like the way you showed the inspiration for components of the game and how that led to making decisions as a group as to what would be involved in the game. What pieces of that would actually make it into the game. Especially seeing the Bobby Cop and the artistic nature of the Bobby Cop, and then seeing how it becomes this graphic in the graphic app, and then to see how it actually materializes in the game. It was just very interesting. Thank you. That was really great.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really, as someone who definitely didn't work, like, my extent of the art side was just making the weapon models. I've never been, all the drawing and concepting and sketching and stuff has never been my end, but just being able to watch that from an outside perspective, it was really incredible watching all of the art guys come up with their respective designs and sort of refine them and all that stuff. So I definitely agree. I think it was really cool to watch that, and I have so much respect for all of our art guys and all the amazing stuff that they do.
And it appeared really well in the presentation too. I think Dr. Fisher typed in
Yes, I see that there.
Yeah, so he's asking, how did you decide who would handle which parts of the game? I'm interested to hear how you navigated that. Also, is there something that you really wanted to get into the game but didn't get in by the end?
I will open this one up to everybody else on my team because I don't want to be the only one talking for all of us. So if anybody else wants to answer either part of that question, please feel free.
I did the level design, and I got that role mainly because I was interested in learning how to do it. I've always found an interest in the design of levels and what makes good level design, what makes bad level design, and so I was the first one that raised their hand to take that role, and I would have loved to see another level make it into this game. It's a lot of work, but I really enjoyed the third level concept I had because it was a little different than the first level, or I shouldn't say a little different. It was a lot different than the first level, and introduced some interesting mechanics that would have been fun to play around with. But yeah, that's I yeah.
We had a very fortunate with the students that we had in this semester where everyone kind of already had a mindset of what they wanted to do going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Jared and Kai, they were both very much on the art side. They both really wanted to do that right from the get-go. Gabe, same thing, wanted to do the level design right from the get-go. Nathan has always been on the coding side, and that's why he became our lead programmer. The first day of class of last semester, Noah asked if he could be the team leader. So right away, the team already was a team. So it was really interesting to be able to have the students that we had, and I was very fortunate to have those students. But they worked really well together as a team, and I don't know what did you guys really want to get into the game that wasn't able to make it in to the demo?
I think this is honestly a question that each of us could answer ourselves because I know that each of us sort of has our little baby in the game that we really wanted to see and that just didn't make the cut. So I'll kick it off. I mean, Gabe already gave his, which was a second level, which I also think would have been really cool. Mine personally was that upgrade mechanic where you could every time you won a level, you would get a bit of money that you could spend to get better weapons or more health or something like that. I've always been really interested in like the systems design part of video games, so like making upgrade trees where this upgrade leads to these upgrades and stuff like that to make that kind of progression. So that was the thing that I really wanted to get into the game, which is that upgrade thing. But the amount of complexity that would have introduced, given the amount of time we had, it just wasn't feasible. But if I had another 3 or 4 months to work on the game, that would be the first thing I'd do.
Okay.
Guess I'll go next. For me, I really wanted to expand the AI more because this was my first time doing any extensive usage of artificial intelligence in Unity. And I looked at quite a bit of videos and tutorials and saw these more advanced programmers making custom algorithms for pathfinding and other states, I guess, for the different AI. And specifically for the flying hat copter, I wanted to have that custom pathfinding so that I would be able to fly around freely, but I had to bite the bullet and do the normal method.
Honestly, I really want to see Noah's animations. I've only seen a couple of them from when he was making them, and I'm like, oh wait, when I heard they weren't gonna be in, I'm just like, dang, I was like really hoping to see these guys moving around, doing all these cool things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought they would have looked really cool. I spent I think a total of like somewhere in the realm of 6 to 8 hours just trying to finagle those things near the end, but I kind of realized that there were other things that I needed to be spending my time on, so I unfortunately had to, kind of like Nathan did, bite the bullet and cut the animations. But if I could make them work, they'd definitely be in there because I liked them too.
Yeah.
I really wanted to see the sort of weapon and arm animations fully integrated. Most of them are, but alongside like some of the weapon textures, it feels like well, all the animations are there. I think it's just that like some of them there were some issues that prevented them from getting in fully before the deadline, which I'm fine with. It still looks good. And as alongside that, I feel like the whole Mercury mechanic there, uh, it would have been cool to see, but it's not something that's in the vision of what's currently available. So I don't think that would have been anything that wasn't last minute like, oh, we can't do this. That was like okay, yeah, we're definitely not going to be able to do this.
All right. Well, I mean, guys, I think you did a great job. I really do. I think you all learned a lot as far as working as a team. And I know Noah learned a lot as far as managing a team and setting deadlines and talking to team members and making sure that they get stuff done on time. Everybody really did an amazing job. The beginning of, I know the end of last semester, I knew it was ambitious, but I wanted them to kind of figure that out on their own because that's part of the learning process. And they did. Less than halfway through of this semester, they kind of understood that it wasn't 3 levels, just wasn't going to happen. So they changed their gears and made the adjustments they needed to make and focused really on what they needed to focus on, and really pulled it all together. Obviously, there were some things that wasn't in there that we thought was going to be, but in my eyes, I think they accomplished what they meant to accomplish, and that was understanding and figuring out how to create a demo or a game from start to finish. If they had more time, I truly think that they could pull it off. So I think they did a great job. You guys all deserve a round of applause and pats on the back because you guys pulled it together. And yeah, if no one else has any comments, then this is it. But if you do have any final comments, then feel free to speak up. And if not, then I suggest then everybody have a great night. And yeah.
I just wanted to say one last thing.
Yeah, go for it.
You guys might consider not calling this the end. Even though this is your final, your capstone, I myself did, when I graduated from college, I worked on a video game with my roommates. Over about the course of a year, we would meet once a week and develop a game. It never came to fruition, but what I will tell you is I learned a lot. And having a consistent deadline, obviously everybody's going to have different schedules and different things going on, but if it seems like you guys have a pretty good team and team chemistry, and nobody seems to be really shoehorned into things that they don't want to do, and that's kind of rare. So I would encourage you to really consider continuing on and maybe seeing if you can develop this further.
Yeah, I won't lie to you and say that we hadn't been talking about that from time to time. It's definitely a thing that we've brought up. We're like, we could, if we had a little bit more time and wanted to keep doing this, we could do all this stuff. So it's definitely it's definitely something that's on our radar. Because yeah, we all really we've spent so much time with this particular project and this concept and all these ideas that like they're very important to us. And so I definitely agree that it could definitely be something that we continue in the future.
Yeah, you've got a lot of work done. You know, you've got a lot, and you have a lot of things set up that could be ready to rock pretty soon. So maybe you guys take a little break, kind of give yourself that, you know, reward for all your hard work. And then maybe I would encourage you, Noah, if you seem like you're fitting very well into the leadership role, see if you can wrangle everybody back in and really talk about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely. I will not lie and say that I did not consider something like that. But yeah, definitely.
Right on. Great job, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, everybody.
All right.
That is
Well,
it.
thank you all for coming. Thank you for seeing our game, I guess. All of the questions and words of encouragement and whatnot are very much appreciated. And I just want to say one last thank you to everybody on my team and Professor Fraser for being really awesome to work with and helping to make this this amazing perfect mess of a game to happen in the time it did. And yeah, it was a really amazing experience, and I'm super glad that I got to do it with the team that I got to do it with.
Yeah, it was a good semester, guys. It was a good semester, and I totally agree. I think you guys should keep working on it, working together. I mean, you can always reach me on Discord or email me with anything. So, but yeah, with that, that is it. I appreciate and thank everybody that did show up and listen to the presentation and ask the questions. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Great job.
thanks for having me, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming.
Peace.
See you.
See ya.